Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining. Just a quick overview of what we'll learn today is just how to build the foundation for the success of your remote patient monitoring program. Really wanted to start with the definition of what is remote patient monitoring. And the overall definition is, it is a digital health solution capturing and recording patient physiological data outside of a traditional health setting. And I think a lot of people by now are familiar with the definition of what remote patient monitoring is, but how do we actually look at that and develop a program for your office? Remote patient monitoring program is an additional service area for your practice. Similarly to if you were going to start a physical therapy department, if you were bringing in a testing area, if you were bringing in a laboratory. This service area targets specifically medically necessary patients based on diagnosis that you deem necessary for monitoring and managing digitally. You're reviewing patient transmissions, you're responding to customized clinical alerts, reviewing data and action items for clinical management, documentation and communication with the patient throughout the calendar month based on the transmissions you are receiving. I want everyone to really think about what that looks like in your practice and for your practice. So, thought process is of why are you implementing an RPM program into your practice? What do you want those outcomes to be? What is the objective for your practice? And who in your practice will be managing your remote patient monitoring program? So if you're looking for opportunity to develop a program, the first thing we would like to see is like really what is your goal or objective? Is it to better manage chronic conditions? Is it to have better insight into patient care outside of the practice setting? Is it to develop an additional revenue stream? Because the codes were developed in order for this revenue stream to not only be, to actually be implemented into your practice. We want this to be successful both for human return on investment and financial return on investment. It's important to identify the goal or objective for your practice. And then who in your practice will be managing your RPM program. So each practice would need to have a lead, clinical staff that is designated or that time is slotted for them to be managing the patients in the program. The same way if you were starting, again, a physical therapy department, you would be hiring a physical therapist. You would be ordering that equipment and you would have a specific designated area. Our specific designated area for remote patient monitoring is virtual, but I want you to have that concept in this is not just another thing to do. This is actually a service area to develop a program in your office for virtual care. Once you identify why you're doing it and that you're doing it, we need to identify your patients. Who belongs on a remote patient monitoring program? What should I be looking at? How many patients should be on it? What should I be doing with them? How does it work? Let's start with just patient identification. So the first, of course, is medical necessity, because this is a program that patients are prescribed or ordered into based on the medical necessity and the plan of care of the provider. What is the diagnosis that your practice will be targeting for their first round of remote patient monitoring patients? For example, you might be targeting hypertension. Then I want you to look at those hypertension patients and see what insurance plan those patients have. Ultimately, we know that for as much care we want to extend, we want to make sure that you're getting paid for the work that you're doing. Look at the insurances, let's look at their reimbursements, make sure remote patient monitoring is covered, and to what extent and to what expense to the patient. As you're reviewing there, maybe you choose your Medicare patients. Going through your Medicare patients, now I want you to look at those patients based on their demographics. What about that patient leads you to think that they would be able to adapt to a remote patient monitoring program? Handling basic technology. Do they have an email address? Have they had a virtual appointment with you? Do they communicate through the portal? These are just little ideas, thoughts for you to go through to see if that patient has some basic technology. Patients do need to have basic technology understanding in a remote patient monitoring program because it is virtual care. RPM, virtual care, is high-tech and high-touch. For the high-tech, it is inherently non-face-to-face. So that's why your patient needs to have an understanding because they're engaging with digital technology and devices. The provider is also engaging with digital transmissions without the patients being in front of them. And the provider is determining alerts and responses through technology. The RPM visit is entirely virtual. The codes are defined as inherently non-face-to-face. Now, RPM is also high-touch. High-touch because there's multiple interactions between the provider and the patients throughout the calendar month. They are responding to alerts when the patient falls outside of your set parameters. And they're also encouraging and communicating with patients when there are no clinical alerts, but still we want the patient to be engaged in the program. Patients need to see and interact with the caregiver, with the provider and or the staff to actually see the appointment correlation. This is a virtual appointment that is happening over the calendar month. Each month is a virtual visit for the duration of the program. So at this point, it's just important to understand that it is both high-tech and high-touch. It's enabling you to have a greater understanding of what's happening with that patient on a daily basis, better to manage that disease state, and also to get the patient involved in their care, as we manage what we monitor. This is an RPM story example. I love a story. So, an 82-year-old female with systolic dysfunctional heart failure is enrolled in a heart failure management program that uses remote physiological monitoring. Based upon the interpreted data, the physician uses medical decision-making to assess the patient's stability and communicates. This communication is ongoing virtual appointment over the full calendar month for review and documentation with the patient and or caregiver. All of the corresponding codes respond to the story. As we know, all coding are numbers that tell the story of what's happening in the note. Back to a small definition of remote patient monitoring, it is a digital health solution that captures and records patients' physiological data. The codes, again, correspond to the story. So once the patient is set up, that's the initial setup and education, 99453. As the data is transmitted, minimum of 16 days in a 30-day period, 99454. As you communicate and document that review with the patient and or caregiver throughout the calendar month, that is billed in increments of 20 minutes aggregate time for the 99457 and the 99458. Again, the coding tells the story of what's happening from the note. This is an overview of the program as we just discussed. Starts with patient enrollment based on medical necessity, moves to the medical assistant or the staff lead to fully explain the RPM program to the patient, engaging with both the patient and the vendor. Then that prescription is sent to us at HealthSnap. We perform the insurance verification for the patient, outreach to the patient with any financial responsibility, explaining again the program based on your prescription. We schedule the onboarding appointment, onboard the patient into the remote patient monitoring program so the patient can begin their transmission of data. We as HealthSnap encourage with our HealthSnap Angels continued communication and transmission of data. If there is no transmission of data, we continue outreach to get the patient back on track. The circle is reviewing the data, communicating with the patient, and constant documentation throughout the calendar month. RPM is a virtual visit over the calendar month that uses patient-generated physiological data transmissions to allow for remote care. The 57 and the 58 codes for the documentation and communication is over the calendar month. And since that is where the RVU work lives, that was where we want everyone to understand that this is an appointment that takes place monthly over the duration of the program. At the end of the month, we review the documentation and coding. It moves into charge entry and processing, and then it is billed for payment to the payer. And the next month, Patient is still on the program, so we don't need a new prescription, but the communication, the transmission, the review, communication, transmission, and review, everything keeps going. And it's for the duration of the program. How do you know the program is working? Well, HealthSnap allows you to not only monitor the daily transmission and alerts, but actually monitor the effectiveness of the disease management, because we have the ability to review lifestyle data and activities of daily living. And as you see the changes, the positive changes in these areas, you are actually using that as the KPIs for the success of your program. As the patient has possibly better sleep, less stress, is able to have greater activity levels. Using HealthSnap allows you to have continuous feedback loop on the management of the disease. I want to stress again that it is a program from the beginning to end, the same as any other program service area that you have in your practice. It is not something elusive. It is not something that is outside the box. The only thing that's outside the box is everything else. We are all moving to more of a virtual world. We need to understand that some things are the same and some things will change. The thing that is the same is this is a service area the same as any other. Again, MRI in your office, X-ray in your office, physical therapy, a lab in your office. All of those service areas would need designated staff, would have to have a protocol, would have to have a means to ensure that that service area is revenue positive. We want to make sure when you're implementing or beginning a remote patient monitoring program that you're thinking of all those steps the same as if you were establishing an in-house service. This service, the same, only it is virtual. Again, it is very high tech, it is high touch, it is enabling you to have a greater communication with the patient and therefore enabling you to better monitor their disease. Again, with HealthSnap, we're able to look at those KPIs daily, actually, to see if what we are doing clinically is affecting the activities of daily living and enhancing the person's lifestyle. And now, on that note, I'll be open for any questions you might have.
Thank you, Lisa. We did have a few questions come in. Thank you guys for your question. The first one we have here is, can any specialty use these codes or is it only for primary care?
Remote patient monitoring is diagnosis driven. So it is the provider that is managing the condition. For example, chronic kidney disease would be nephrology. And if they want that patient, need that patient monitored for that disease state, then yes, this is open to any specialty, to any doctor based on medical necessity, not specific to specialty.
Great. The next question we had come in is, what is the duration of time a patient is typically on an RPM program?
The patient is typically on a program for 6 to 12 months or until a desired goal or outcome is reached. We do have patients on remote patient monitoring for weight management. In that case, we are seeing them on for a year or until a 5% weight loss is met. So again, it's based on medical necessity. We want the patient to be engaged in the program and understand why. And we're seeing, again, 6 to 12 months is the usual time frame for this program.
Great. So the next question that we had is, how is this RPM program actually prescribed to a patient?
This program is prescribed, again, I want you to think of physical therapy for this example. It is prescribed based on medical necessity, that you're going to give a diagnosis of what you want monitored for the medical necessity. There's going to be a treatment program, a treatment plan that you have on the prescription. You want frequency of use and you want the duration of the program. You want to know that the patient is engaged, the patient understands fully the program. Similarly to prescribing physical therapy, again, treatment plan, plan of care, frequency, and your desired outcome.
Great. So we had one more. Let's see. How can the practice best optimize the RPM program?
The best optimization for an RPM program begins at the implementation of an RPM program. Fully understanding that it is a program and a service area to be developed in your practice. Provider engagement is necessary for program optimization. Reviewing the data for the KPIs, as we have here with HealthSnap, and having feedback allows to see for patient success, resulting in higher returns both on the human return on investment and a financial return on investment. Constantly looking at and engaging the patient throughout the month.
Great, thank you so much, Lisa. With that, I wanted to encourage any other questions. I did put it up in the chat